The thick, choking smell of smoke ripped me right out of my sleep. It wasn't the gentle aroma of a distant barbecue. This was harsh, chemical, and terrifyingly close. Panic tightened my chest as I scrambled out of bed, throwing the sheets aside like they were on fire themselves. My feet barely registered the cool floor as I lunged towards the bedroom window. What I saw outside wasn't just smoke. It was my motorcycle, my police-issued, stay-toned motorcycle, completely engulfed in roaring flames right there in my own driveway. Fire clawed greedily at the metal, licking the pavement beneath it, turning my pride and joy into a horrifying bonfire. My first thought, a frantic scramble for the fire extinguisher near the door, died almost instantly. Even as my hand reached for it, I knew deep down it was useless. The fire was too intense, too widespread. The damage was catastrophic, already done. Stepping outside felt like walking into an oven. The wave of heat hit my face instantly, my bare feet stinging against the cool concrete of the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the roar and crackle of the inferno consuming my bike. Shock held me frozen for a second, just staring at the ruin. But beneath that shock, a different kind of heat started to build, a cold, hard rage deep in my gut. That's when I heard it, laughter. Not distant, not muffled, but clear and chillingly close. I snapped my head towards the house directly across the street. There, standing in the perfectly manicured shadows of their prize-winning lawn, was a small group of people. Wine glasses glinted in the firelight as they casually clinked them together, like they were toasting some grand achievement. My jaw locked tight as I recognized them instantly. It was the HOA board. And right there, front and center, stood Mrs. Pennington, the president, smugness practically radiating off her. She whispered something to the others, then shot a sickeningly self-satisfied grin straight at me. "Next time, follow the rules, Mr. Dawson," she called out, her voice practically dripping with fake sweetness and condescension. For a heart-stopping moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Not from fear, but from the sheer, unbelievable audacity of it all. I'd faced down real criminals, reckless drivers, desperate people in dark alleys, but never, ever had I imagined suburban homeowners committing arson, a serious felony, over something so petty, so unbelievably stupid. These lunatics had actually set fire to my property, my work vehicle, because I wouldn't play their little neighborhood games. Just 2 days earlier, these very same people had shown up on my doorstep. They presented a welcome letter, but the fake smiles and overly friendly tones couldn't hide the thinly veiled threat underneath. The Homeowners Association, or as I'd already started thinking of them, the neighborhood mafia, made it abundantly clear that joining wasn't really optional in their eyes. They talked about community standards and property values, but all I heard was control over my house, my yard, even where I parked my own damn vehicle. Their rehearsed friendliness made my skin crawl. I'd politely but firmly declined their offer. I wasn't interested in their little power games, didn't think much more of it. Apparently, that was a mistake. The fine started almost immediately. First, a notice slipped under my door claiming my grass was half an inch too long. A few days later, another one arrived, this time declaring my police motorcycle, parked neatly in my own driveway, a non-compliant vehicle that needed to be hidden from sight. The fine attached, $500. I actually laughed out loud when I read that one. Laughed, crumpled it up, and tossed it straight into the trash where it belonged. I wasn't a member of their ridiculous club. They had absolutely zero authority over me or my property, or so I thought. Clearly, they hadn't appreciated my refusal to bend to their will. They hadn't taken my dismissal well at all. Back in the present, the flashing red and blue lights of the fire trucks painted eerie patterns across my house and lawn. Firefighters swarmed the driveway, finally wrestling the blaze under control, their hoses hissing against the dying flames. The sickening smell of burnt rubber, scorched metal, and extinguished chemicals filled the night air. I just stood there, arms crossed tightly over my chest, watching in numb silence as my bike, the machine I relied on to chase down suspects, respond to life-or-death emergencies. The very symbol of my service to the community was reduced to a twisted, blackened skeleton of metal. One of the firefighters, a guy I knew from patrolling the town, walked over, shaking his head and letting out a low whistle. "Damn, Jack," he said, his voice grim. "What the hell happened here?" I took a slow, deep breath, the anger still simmering just below the surface. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the tension radiating through me. "HOA happened," I replied, my voice low and tight. His eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "You serious?" I didn't need to answer. The look on my face, the clenching of my jaw so hard my teeth hurt, said it all. I knew exactly who was responsible, and I had a strong feeling my security cameras knew too. Hours later, long after the flashing lights were gone and only the charred wreckage remained, I sat hunched over in my living room. The acrid smell still hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder. On my computer screen, the grainy black and white footage from my security cameras played out. My fingers tapped rhythmically against the table, a nervous energy I couldn't shake. And then I saw it, clear as day, despite the low light. The HOA board, yes, the entire damn board creeping onto my property like thieves in the night. I watched, my blood running cold then boiling hot, as one of them, some balding guy I vaguely recognized wearing a truly awful sweater vest, casually poured gasoline all over my motorcycle like he was watering plants. Then another figure stepped forward, a woman I knew instantly as Mrs. Pennington's right-hand crony, and struck a match. My eye twitched involuntarily as the flames erupted on screen. There it was, undeniable video proof. They hadn't just committed vandalism, they had deliberately set fire to a police vehicle. Not just any vehicle, but a state-owned law enforcement motorcycle. A felony, a massive felony. And here was the absolute kicker, the part that made a slow, cold smile finally creep onto my face. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. Sure, they knew I was a cop. They probably pictured me as some low-level city patrolman, someone whose authority ended at the town line. They didn't know I was a state trooper. They didn't realize my jurisdiction stretched far beyond their little suburban kingdom. They had no clue they had just committed a major crime, potentially a federal one depending on how you slice state property laws, right under the nose of someone who had the power and the reach to bring their entire self-important world crashing down around them. Oh, they had messed up. They had messed up spectacularly. The next morning arrived with a deceptively beautiful sunrise, painting the sky in soft oranges and blues that felt completely at odds with the scorched patch on my driveway and the simmering fury inside me. I stood outside, arms crossed again, sipping a mug of strong black coffee and watching the familiar morning ritual unfold across the street. The HOA board members were gathering near the community garden for their usual gossip session, just like any other day. Mrs. Pennington, ever the picture of suburban power in her crisp pantsuit and pearl necklace, spotted me immediately. She shot me a look that was supposed to be sympathetic but came across as utterly triumphant. "Such a shame about your motorcycle, Mr. Dawson," she called across the quiet street, her voice dripping with that same fake sweetness that now made my stomach churn. "Perhaps next time you'll reconsider our community guidelines." I let a smile spread across my face, not a friendly one, but slow, deliberate, maybe even a little predatory. "Oh, I definitely will, Mrs. Pennington," I replied, keeping my tone light, almost playful. It seemed to catch her off guard. "In fact," I continued, taking a slow sip of my coffee, "I'd love to discuss the matter further, with all of you actually. Maybe we could chat down at the station." Her perfectly composed expression flickered. "The station," she repeated, blinking rapidly, the first hint of confusion clouding her smugness. That was my cue. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge, and casually flipped it open. I didn't make a big show of it, just held it so the early morning sunlight glinted sharply off the polished metal seal, the seal of the state police. Her face changed instantly. It was like watching a mask crumble. The smug smile vanished, replaced by wide-eyed shock. The color drained from her face so fast I genuinely thought she might collapse right there on the pristine sidewalk. The other board members, who had been smirking along with her just moments before, started shifting uncomfortably. Their confidence evaporated like dew in the rising sun. They exchanged nervous glances, their earlier arrogance completely gone. "Yeah," I continued, savoring the moment, watching the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard against a rising tide of panic. "The station. Seeing as how you and your little committee here committed felony arson against state property last night." I paused, letting the words hang heavily in the quiet morning air. "I figure we should probably have a proper, official chat about it. Maybe bring in a few of my colleagues. The ones who specialize in arresting people for major felonies like this." Mrs. Pennington took an involuntary step back, then another. Her eyes darted wildly between me, my badge, and her suddenly very quiet board members. The others looked like deer trapped in the headlights of an oncoming truck, frozen, terrified, realizing way too late the magnitude of their mistake. I let out a slow, quiet chuckle, the sound carrying easily across the street. "See you all soon, folks." And with that, I turned calmly, walked back into my house and closed the door, leaving them standing there in the wreckage of their own making, stewing in the undeniable incoming doom. Oh, this was just the beginning. Seeing the raw fear replace that smugness in their eyes, honestly, if you were in my shoes, wouldn't you feel a little bit satisfied too? The real fun was about to start. Okay, here are the remaining parts of the story, continuing directly from where we left off. It didn't take long for the full-blown panic to set in across the street. Throughout the morning, I caught glimpses of frantic huddles outside Mrs. Pennington's house. Whispered arguments, fearful glances shot towards my windows, hands wringing. It was pure, unadulterated dread. The same people who had laughed and celebrated while my motorcycle burned now looked like cornered animals, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. And the beautiful part, they still didn't grasp just how deep the trouble truly went. They thought they were dealing with a local issue, maybe a lawsuit, maybe some hefty fines. They hadn't yet connected the dots to state-level felonies and serious jail time. I spent the rest of the morning methodically preparing. I reviewed the security footage again, making multiple secure copies. I contacted my station, briefing my captain and coordinating with my buddy, Officer Martinez, who would handle the local side of the arrests. Martinez's reaction when he saw the footage was priceless. I heard him laugh over the phone for a solid minute before he finally managed to gasp out, "Wait, you're telling me a pack of suburbanites led by some power-tripping Karen decided to commit felony arson on a state trooper's bike, over parking? Oh man, Jack, this is gold." He promised to get the warrants drafted immediately while I focused on the next act, the noon HOA meeting. I wouldn't miss that for the world. After a quick, surprisingly satisfying breakfast, I changed into casual off-duty clothes, no uniform needed for this, made sure my badge was easily accessible, and strolled down the street towards the community clubhouse. This was the very place where they likely held their smug planning sessions, maybe even toasted to my fiery misfortune the night before. The irony was thick enough to taste. The moment I pushed open the doors and stepped inside, the chatter died instantly. Every single board member was present, seated around their long, polished table like kings and queens of a tiny, insignificant kingdom. Now, however, they looked at me like I was a specter come to haunt them. Mrs. Pennington sat rigidly at the head of the table, her face a mask of strained neutrality, but the white-knuckled grip she had on her expensive pen betrayed her completely. The others fidgeted, avoided my eyes, their earlier confidence replaced by a palpable, suffocating fear. "Mr. Dawson," Mrs. Pennington said finally, forcing a smile that didn't come close to reaching her terrified eyes. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I didn't rush. I took my time walking slowly towards the table, letting the heavy silence stretch, letting them stew in it. I stopped directly in front of them, pulled out my phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then calmly turned it around so they all had a clear view. The security footage began to play, the sneaking onto my property, the sloshing gasoline, the flick of the match, the eruption of flames, the celebratory laughter and clinking glasses. Every damning second played out in crystal clarity. I watched as the last vestiges of color drained from Mrs. Pennington's face. Somewhere down the table, someone made a small, strangled, gasping sound. I let the video finish before pocketing my phone. I think, I said, my voice dangerously calm, almost conversational. "We need to have a little chat." The reaction was immediate, though not quite what they expected. The balding man in the sweater vest, the enthusiastic arsonist from the video, actually shot to his feet, his face turning beet red. "This is outrageous," he sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You can't just barge in here and sit down," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the sharp edge of command I usually reserved for non-compliant suspects on the highway. He sat. Instantly. Mrs. Pennington took a shaky, audible breath. "Mr. Dawson," she tried again, attempting a reasonable tone, "I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this." I crossed my arms, leaning slightly against the table. "Oh, I'm sure there is," I replied, letting a hint of amusement color my voice. "I'd genuinely love to hear it. Maybe you can reasonably explain why a group of supposedly respectable homeowners decided to commit felony arson against a law enforcement vehicle because of a parking disagreement." Absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. I let it hang there, thick and uncomfortable. Can you imagine the sheer nerve it took for them to even think they could explain this away? Finally, I broke the silence. "All right, here's what's going to happen," I stated, my tone shifting from amused to deadly serious. "In approximately," I glanced at my watch, "1 hour, maybe less, uniformed officers will be arriving at each of your homes. They'll have arrest warrants with your names on them." Their eyes widened in unison. "You see," I continued, looking from one terrified face to the next, "unlike your little association, I don't just get to make up rules and fine people for having the wrong color mailbox. I enforce real laws, and setting fire to a police vehicle, especially a state-owned one, is a very, very real and very serious crime." I paused for effect. "So, congratulations. You all just successfully turned your petty little homeowners association into a criminal organization under investigation for conspiracy and arson." The panic in the room exploded. It was no longer contained fear. It was pure, unadulterated meltdown. One woman started clutching at her pearl necklace, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Another man, not the sweater vest guy, was sweating so profusely it looked like he'd just run a marathon in a sauna. But Mrs. Pennington, bless her delusional heart, still tried to cling to her crumbling authority. This is ridiculous," she declared, her voice cracking despite her efforts. "This is nothing but a misunderstanding. You're blowing this completely out of proportion." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only those closest could hear clearly, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "A misunderstanding? Really? You accidentally trespassed onto my property in the middle of the night. You accidentally poured gasoline all over my state-issued motorcycle. You accidentally lit the match and accidentally stood around laughing about it." She licked her lips, frantically searching for an argument, any argument. "Why don't you try this?" I suggested softly. "Call my captain. Explain to him, the head of my state police barracks, why you thought burning one of his troops' motorcycles was a reasonable step in enforcing community guidelines. Maybe he'll see your side. Maybe he'll decide not to push for the absolute maximum sentence the law allows for this kind of felony." Her composure finally shattered. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking support but found none. Her loyal board members were too busy contemplating their own futures, visibly realizing she had led them straight off a cliff. Right on cue, as if scripted, the clubhouse doors swung open again. This time, 2 uniformed officers walked in. My buddy Martinez was in the lead, a look of professional seriousness barely concealing his amusement at the sheer absurdity of the situation. "Good afternoon, folks," Martinez announced cheerfully, holding up a stack of papers. "Got some official paperwork here with quite a few of your names on it." Absolute pandemonium erupted. Some members started shouting protests, claiming innocence or ignorance. Their cries were quickly silenced by the unmistakable metallic click of handcuffs being drawn from belts. The pearl-clutching woman actually did faint this time, slumping dramatically sideways in her chair. One man made a desperate dash for a side door, only to be calmly intercepted by the second officer waiting there. It was a full-blown, suburban nightmare meltdown. Mrs. Pennington, however, stood her ground, her face contorted with fury. "This is harassment," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and shrill. "We are upstanding members of this community. Pillars, you can't do this to us." Martinez just grinned, stepping forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice patient but firm, "with all due respect, you and your friends here burned a cop's bike, a state trooper's bike. We absolutely can do this. And we are." One by one, the mighty HOA board members were handcuffed. Some cried silently, tears streaming down their faces. Some pleaded incoherently for leniency. Some continued to shout indignant protests. None of it made a difference. As I watched them being escorted out, heads bowed or held high in defiance, and placed into the waiting squad cars, I couldn't help but shake my head. These people had terrorized their neighbors for years, drunk on their minuscule power, thinking they were untouchable. They'd bullied, fined, and harassed ordinary folks over the most ridiculous things, acting as if they were above the law. Now they were just common criminals facing serious charges. Martinez came over and clapped me firmly on the shoulder. "You know," he said, chuckling softly as he watched Mrs. Pennington being firmly guided into the back of a cruiser, still yelling about injustice, "I've dealt with a lot of dumb criminals in my time, Jack, but this group right here, they take the absolute cake." I finally let out a genuine laugh, the tension and anger draining away, replaced by a profound sense of relief and vindication. "Yeah," I agreed, watching the last police car pull away. "They really, really do." The reign of the HOA terror was officially over. The neighborhood felt different almost immediately. Quieter, yes, but also lighter. Without the constant threat of HOA busybodies scrutinizing every blade of grass or misplaced trash can, people seemed to relax. Lawns were mowed without rulers, cars were parked freely in driveways, kids played a little louder, and most importantly, nobody's property was being set on fire by their disgruntled neighbors. The ridiculous, petty tyranny of the HOA was gone, and it felt incredibly good. The court case that followed was the talk of the town. The courtroom was packed on hearing days, a mix of curious neighbors, local reporters, and people who just wanted to see the mighty Mrs. Pennington face the music. And face it, she did, though not with any sense of remorse. She marched into court dressed to the nines, carrying herself with that same old arrogant confidence, as if she truly believed her social standing somehow made her immune to consequences. The other board members were a stark contrast, pale, drawn, the weight of their stupidity clearly visible on their faces. They looked like they'd aged years in just a few weeks. The prosecution laid out the case clearly and methodically. The centerpiece, of course, was the security footage, played on a large screen for the entire courtroom, judge, jury, and packed gallery to see. It was damning. The sneaking, the gasoline, the match, the flames, the laughter. You could hear audible gasps ripple through the audience. Even the judge looked stunned, pausing the proceedings for a moment just to shake his head in disbelief. Mrs. Pennington's defense was laughable. First, she tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding, a misguided attempt to enforce community standards because I was being unreasonable. When that fell flat, she tried painting herself and the board as victims, intimidated by me, claiming the fire was somehow an accident born of stress. The judge wasn't buying any of it. "Counselor," he said, rubbing his temples wearily, "are you seriously asking this court to believe that 6 rational adults accidentally conspired to trespass, accidentally doused a police motorcycle with gasoline, accidentally lit it on fire, and then accidentally stood around celebrating while it burned to the ground?" Mrs. Pennington stammered, her prepared speech failing her under the judge's incredulous gaze. The jury didn't need long to deliberate. The verdict came back swift and unanimous, guilty, on all serious counts for every single one of them. Sentencing day was the final nail in the coffin. Some of the lesser-involved members got off with probation, hefty fines, and significant community service hours, hopefully spent cleaning up actual litter, not policing mailbox colors. But for the ringleaders, including Mrs. Pennington and her gasoline-pouring, sweater-vested accomplice, the judge handed down actual jail time. The look on Mrs. Pennington's face when the sentence was read, when the reality finally hit that her power suits and pearls wouldn't save her, when the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists for the final time before being led away, that was a moment of pure, unadulterated justice. The woman who had ruled our neighborhood with an iron fist was now just another inmate. The fallout was immediate and decisive. With its leadership either incarcerated or too ashamed to show their faces, the HOA effectively ceased to exist overnight. A community meeting was called, a real one this time, filled with relieved homeowners, and a vote was held. In record time, the Homeowners Association was officially, legally, and joyfully disbanded. People cheered like their favorite team had just won the championship. Someone down the street actually set off fireworks, an act that would have earned them a stern warning and a hefty fine just weeks before. The best part, we took the leftover HOA funds, money once used for printing violation notices and paying for legal consultations on fence heights, and decided to put it towards something positive. We voted to demolish the old, hated HOA office building and turn the land into a community park and barbecue area. A place for gathering, for relaxing, for enjoying our homes without fear. I personally made sure I was there for the demolition, watching that symbol of petty tyranny get torn down brick by brick. It was incredibly satisfying. We put up picnic tables, a couple of large grills, and my personal touch, a big, welcoming sign that read, "Community Gathering Spot, HOA-Free Zone." Our first neighborhood barbecue in the new park was amazing. Families who had barely spoken for years, pitted against each other by absurd HOA rules, were laughing together, sharing food, sharing stories. Even Martinez and a couple of the other officers who handled the arrest stopped by. Martinez saw the banner I'd hung over the grill station, the first annual anti-HOA community cookout, and just burst out laughing. "You really went there, huh, Jack?" he said, shaking his head as he grabbed a burger. "Damn right I did," I grinned back. "Gotta make sure nobody ever forgets." People started swapping their own HOA horror stories, the fines for non-regulation garden gnomes, the citations for trash cans left out 5 minutes too long, the arguments over approved paint colors. Hearing them all, I realized just how much relief this whole ordeal had brought. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the relaxed, happy crowd, I leaned back in my chair, finally feeling a sense of peace. This wasn't exactly the quiet life I'd envisioned when I moved here, but maybe it was better. Just then, a new face appeared, a guy maybe in his late 40s looking around with interest. He wandered over and extended a hand. "Nice setup here," he said pleasantly. "Just moved into the neighborhood. Name's Greg." "Jack," I replied, shaking his hand. He gestured towards the happy chaos. "So, what happened to the old HOA anyway?" I chuckled, glancing around at the liberated homeowners. "Let's just say they had a little disagreement involving fire and state property." Greg laughed, clearly thinking I was joking. "Sounds like the place is better off without them. Hey, speaking of which," he continued casually, "have you guys thought about starting up a new HOA? You know, maybe just a more reasonable one." I slowly set my drink down, turned, and looked him square in the eye, letting a small grin play on my lips. "Greg," I said, my voice friendly but firm, "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear you say that." The look of sudden panic on his face was priceless. He threw his hands up, laughing nervously. "Kidding, totally kidding." "Good," I said, handing him a plate piled high with barbecue. "Now eat up before I start writing you citations for asking dumb questions." The night ended under a sky full of stars, filled with laughter, good food, and a sense of community that felt earned, fought for, and incredibly precious. I had moved here seeking peace and quiet, but instead, I'd stumbled into a fight and found something more valuable. A neighborhood worth defending, full of people finally free to just live their lives. And as I leaned back, taking it all in, I had to admit, victory tasted pretty damn good. And that's how a power-hungry HOA Karen and her board learned the hard way not to mess with a state trooper, or anyone else for that matter. Sometimes, standing up for yourself leads to justice for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and maybe subscribe for more tales of when messing with the wrong person backfires spectacularly. Stay safe out there.